The rhythmic, heavy sweep of the windshield wipers did absolutely nothing to clear the blinding glare of red and blue emergency lights reflecting off the wet asphalt. I sat perfectly still in the driver's seat of my sedan, the engine idling smoothly, listening to the relentless city rain hit the metal roof. The cold air pulling in through the 2-inch gap in my window smelled sharply of wet concrete, hot brakes, and exhaust. My hands rested loosely on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. I hadn't been speeding, I hadn't run a red light, but a right taillight had apparently shorted out somewhere between my server farm in the commercial district and this specific intersection, exactly 2 blocks away from my apartment complex. Officer Davis stepped out from the halo of her cruiser's headlights. The heavy canvas of her yellow high-visibility rain jacket shed water in thick sheets. She walked up to my door, tapping her knuckles once against the glass before handing a stiff, waterproof citation slip through the gap in the window. "Get the bulb replaced within 48 hours, Mr. White," she instructed, her voice carrying an edge of routine exhaustion over the sound of the storm. "Or this warning automatically converts into a moving violation fine in the municipal database." "Understood," I said, my voice low and even. I took the slip between my index and middle fingers, pulling it inside. I reached for the gear shift to put the car back into drive, but Davis lingered. She shifted her weight, her duty belt creaking loudly against the nylon of her jacket. She leaned down slightly, aiming the tight beam of her heavy flashlight past the hood of my car, pointing it directly toward the towering glass entrance of the upscale high-rise apartment building down the block. "You live in Unit 4A, right?" she asked, wiping rainwater from her jaw. My hand stopped halfway to the ignition button. I didn't look at her. I looked at the building. "I do. You know the woman who lives next door to you in 4B? Lucia Lopez?" The rhythmic tapping of the rain against the glass seemed to suddenly vanish, swallowed by a sharp vacuum in the cab of the car. My thumb stopped tapping the steering wheel. "I know her," I stated carefully, keeping my facial expression entirely blank. "We share the same balcony divider." Davis tapped her heavy metal pen against the plastic cover of her citation book. "Just giving you a heads up. We got a dispatch call an hour ago from a private corporate security firm. They requested a uniformed police presence on standby while they served her with a formal cease and desist order." I stared at the dashboard display. "A cease and desist for what?" "They're officially accusing her of leaking proprietary alpha-stage source code from her tech firm to an overseas competitor," Davis said, her tone entirely conversational. "It's a massive civil suit waiting to happen. They seized her corporate hardware, locked her out of the building, and suspended her without pay. They want her completely out of the industry by tomorrow." The officer's words stayed on my tongue like old metal. I folded the stiff citation slip twice too tight, and the paper creased hard enough to slice the edge of my thumb. "Lucia doesn't leak code," I stated. It wasn't a defense based on neighborly sentiment. I built complex digital systems for a living. Lucia Lopez was meticulous, organized to a terrifying fault, and fiercely loyal to the team she had spent 4 years building. The variable simply did not fit the equation. More importantly, my startup's private servers were actively routed through the building's main trunk line. If they ruined her publicly, it wouldn't just destroy her career, it would put corporate security on my floor, sniffing through my company, and pulling my firewall logs next. I wasn't helping out of romance. I was protecting my own perimeter. "Not my department," Davis shrugged, taking a step back into the driving rain. "I just stood in the hallway to make sure nobody threw a punch when they handed her the paperwork. Have a good night, Mr. White. Get that tail light fixed." I rolled the window up, sealing out the noise. I pressed the ignition button, put the car in drive, and pulled into the underground parking garage. 10 minutes later, I stood out on my apartment balcony. The towering city skyline was completely blurred by the thick, rolling fog coming off the harbor. I leaned my shoulder against the thick, frosted glass divider that separated my outdoor living space from hers. The rain had finally stopped, leaving a heavy, sticky humidity. I didn't knock on the glass. I just waited. 5 minutes passed before I heard the heavy sliding glass door drag open on the other side of the divider. A small, heavy ceramic flower pot clinked sharply against the wrought iron metal railing. I could hear the faint, uneven rhythm of her breathing. I saw the police lights from the intersection down the street. Lucia's voice drifted over the top of the frosted glass. It was tight, strained, completely missing its usual sharp cadence. "Did you get a ticket, Brayden?" "Taillight," I said simply, focusing my eyes on a blinking red aviation warning light 2 miles away. "Did you get served?" I heard the sudden rustle of expensive suit fabric. "How do you know about that?" "The officer mentioned it. They use the badge as intimidation dressing to make a civil issue feel like a raid." I turned slowly, resting my shoulder against the cold metal frame of the divider. "What exactly did they accuse you of leaking?" "The core optimization algorithm for our new neural net interface," she said. The words tumbled out fast. "It was Julian, my co-director of marketing. He claims he found a server access log showing my specific user credentials downloading the entire back-end repository to an external IP address. At 3 in the morning, last Tuesday, my thumb stopped tapping the metal railing. I looked at the damp concrete floor, and the immediate consequence? They took my phone. They took my laptop," she said, her voice catching on the final word. "Julian wants my job, Brayden. He was passed over for the senior VP role last Thursday. I got the promotion. If this goes public, I'm blacklisted from the tech sector. Everything I've built over the last decade is gone." "Were you awake at 3 in the morning last Tuesday?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly level. "I was asleep," she said firmly, striking the metal railing with the palm of her hand. "I didn't touch that code. But the server logs have my unique cryptographic signature on the download request. A digital signature can be easily spoofed if someone has uninterrupted physical access to a bridge device," I noted. "Your personal laptop. The one you use in your living room to sync your corporate calendar. If Julian spoofed your credentials, he needed an external bridge to bounce the signal." "Brayden, I appreciate the offer, but this isn't a glitching router," she said, letting out a bitter sigh. "Julian has a dedicated team of aggressive security auditors backing his claim. You run a small startup. I build the baseline architecture that those auditors use to parse their data," I stated. "Bring the personal laptop to the divider." A minute later, a sleek silver laptop was passed carefully over the top of the frosted glass. I reached up and took it, the brushed metal cold against my palms. "I don't know how to fight a digital ghost," she admitted quietly, her fingers lingering near the edge of the glass. "You don't fight a ghost," I said, opening the lid. The sharp blue light of the screen illuminated my face. "You trace the footprints it leaves in the sand. Go to sleep, Lucia." I didn't sleep. I carried her laptop inside and set it down on my black granite kitchen island. I booted up my primary workstation, linking her device to my dual monitors through a secure, encrypted hardline. Julian had used a basic routing script to bounce the massive download command through her home IP address. But he forgot that her personal laptop was configured to aggressively ping a smart home thermostat in her hallway every 10 minutes. I highlighted the specific string of code on my left monitor. At exactly 3 a.m. last Tuesday, the thermostat ping returned a massive latency error. It timed out. The limited bandwidth of her residential router was completely flooded by a massive, high-speed outbound data packet. The repository download. I isolated the destination. The external IP address receiving the stolen code wasn't a rival tech competitor. It was a cheap proxy server. I tapped the monitor frame with my knuckle. The timestamp was a digital anchor, but it wouldn't sink him alone. It proved her network was hijacked, but it didn't prove Julian pulled the trigger. I needed more. I made a pot of drip coffee, measuring the grounds precisely. I poured 2 heavy ceramic mugs, walked out to the balcony, and set one gently on the metal railing on her side of the frosted glass divider. At exactly 7 a.m., I heard the heavy slide of her door opening. "You're awake early," she said, picking up the mug. "I have the trace logs," I said, handing a thick, stapled stack of printed papers over the glass. "Julian bounced the transfer through your home router. But the massive data packet choked your bandwidth, causing your smart thermostat to log a timeout error at the exact second of the theft. I heard the sharp rustle of paper as she flipped rapidly through the pages. "This is undeniable," she breathed. He framed me. "I have a preliminary meeting with the executive board and the external auditors at 10 o'clock this morning," she said. The panic from last night was entirely gone, replaced by sharp competence. If I walk into that boardroom and hand them this stack of paper, it forces them to halt the termination process. "It stops the immediate bleeding," I agreed, leaning my forearms on the railing. "But Julian still controls the internal narrative. He's a marketer. He can easily claim the trace data you brought in is fabricated." "I don't care what he claims," she said, a cold, hard determination lacing her words. "I have proof." He crossed the wrong line. She left for the meeting. I went to my home office, sitting down in front of my screens. I assumed the data packet would solve the problem cleanly. I was entirely wrong. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the coastal fog had burned off, leaving a pale sunlight reflecting off the glass towers. My cell phone vibrated sharply on the desk. It was a text from Sarah, Lucia's loyal marketing team lead, sent to a generic contact form on my startup's website. "Julian just locked Lucia out of the building. He's telling everyone she's guilty." I locked my terminal screen, pushed my chair back, and walked out onto the concrete balcony. Lucia was leaning heavily against the wrought iron railing, still wearing the sharp, dark suit she had put on for her meeting. She was staring blankly out at the city traffic below. "I got a message from Sarah," I said quietly, stopping a few feet from the frosted glass divider. "Did the trace logs hold up?" She didn't turn her head immediately. She let out a slow, measured breath. "They held up enough to stop human resources from formally firing me. The external auditors looked at your packet analysis and agreed that the home network data was highly anomalous." But Julian fought the conclusion. "He argued that the latency error was purely circumstantial," she said, finally turning to look at me through the translucent glass. "He told the CEO that a sophisticated corporate spy would naturally use a proxy server to mask their footprint, and that my technical defense was just a highly orchestrated cover-up. They extended my suspension for another 48 hours. "I am completely isolated," she confirmed, rubbing the back of her neck. "I can't access my own departmental files. I can't email my team. Julian has 48 hours to completely reshape the internal narrative." I didn't offer a motivational speech about patience. I walked back inside my apartment, heading to my secondary workbench. I unlocked the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet and pulled out a matte black, unbranded smartphone. It was a sterile, wiped device I kept for testing alpha-stage communication protocols. I plugged the phone directly into my primary tower, flashing the hard drive and installing a custom, stripped-down operating system. I routed the entire communication matrix through a secure, heavily encrypted VPN tunnel hosted on my private server rack downtown. 10 minutes later, I walked back out onto the balcony. Lucia was sitting in a low patio chair. I reached over the frosted glass divider and dropped the matte black phone onto the small metal table next to her. The heavy device hit the metal with a sharp clack. Her eyes snapped open. "What is this?" "A secure line," I explained. "Julian's security auditors are likely running a passive monitoring sweep on your residential Wi-Fi network. If you use your normal phone, they will log every keystroke." She picked up the heavy black device. "It leaves absolutely zero digital footprint on your local network," I continued, my voice entirely pragmatic. "The only contact programmed into it is my personal number. If you need to search a corporate law precedent or order takeout without being tracked by an auditor, you use that." Lucia stared at the glowing screen for a long time. The heavy defensive wall she kept up in the boardroom fractured slightly. "You didn't have to do this, Brayden," she said softly. "You needed a clean bridge to the outside," I replied simply. "Now you have one." That evening, the chaotic noise of the city seemed to quiet down. A sharp knock sounded on the frosted glass at 7 o'clock. I walked out to find 2 white cardboard takeout boxes sitting on the flat top ledge of the divider. The rich, Heavy smell of garlic and roasted tomatoes drifted up from the cartons. "The secure line works," Lucia said from her side of the glass. She had changed out of her stiff corporate suit and into a simple gray sweatshirt. "I ordered Italian. I figured you probably forgot to eat while you were compiling all that data last night." I picked up the warm carton. She was absolutely correct. "Thank you. That is an accurate assessment." We sat on our respective sides of the frosted glass, eating in silence for several minutes. It was a strange, highly compartmentalized dynamic, physically separated by an inch of industrial glass. Yet the shared atmosphere was grounded, quiet, and steady. When Julian first leveled the accusation this morning, she said quietly, her fork scraping lightly against the cardboard, "I actually questioned my own sanity for a second. When someone points a finger with that much manufactured certainty, it makes you doubt your own baseline." Her secure phone lit up on the concrete between us, buzzing with 5 new forwarded emails in under a minute. HR, PR, legal, all stamped urgent in bright red text. I reached over and flipped the device face down against the cold metal. "He isn't sending proof," I stated plainly. "He's sending noise, weaponized to exhaust you so you miss the structural flaws in his lie." "You don't operate like that," she noted, looking at the back of the phone. "My system requires optimization," I said. I heard a soft, genuine laugh from the other side of the glass. "I appreciate your optimization, Brayden White." The temporary relief held through the night, but the shift happened at exactly 2:14 p.m. the next day. My apartment sounded wrong, no refrigerator hum, no muffled neighbor television, just the harsh click of my mechanical keyboard and the heavy thud of my pulse in my ears. The custom encrypted phone I had given Lucia lit up on my desk. I picked it up. "Look at TechNet Insider." Right now, I opened a new browser tab. The massive, bold headline dominated the entire front page. "Prominent marketing director accused of massive alpha code theft at leading neural net firm." My jaw tightened immediately. Julian hadn't waited for the independent auditors. He went directly to the press to permanently destroy her reputation. I stood up from my desk. I walked swiftly out to the balcony. Lucia was sitting directly on the cold concrete floor of her balcony, her knees pulled up tight to her chest. Her sleek silver laptop was open on the ground, the screen displaying a cascading stream of incoming emails. Her personal cell phone was sitting face down on the concrete, vibrating violently and continuously as calls poured in. I walked over to the frosted glass divider, sat down on the concrete on my side, and leaned my back firmly against the thick glass, mirroring her position. "My phone hasn't stopped ringing for 40 minutes, she said. Her voice was completely hollow. "The board called me 10 minutes ago. They permanently suspended me. The CEO told me that unless I can absolutely, publicly prove Julian orchestrated this leak, I need to resign by tomorrow morning to save the company's stock price." The vibration of her phone buzzed annoyingly through the concrete floor. "I can't fight the internet, Brayden," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "I can't outshout a viral headline. The truth doesn't matter if the lie is louder." I didn't offer an empty platitude. I stood up from the concrete. "Stay off the internet," I instructed calmly. "Do not answer the phone. Do not draft a resignation letter." I walked back into my home office and locked the door. If Julian wanted to play his hand in the public domain, the technical trace logs were no longer enough. I needed a financial paper trail. I spent the next 4 hours writing a targeted web-scraping script, pulling public metadata from the proxy server Julian used. At 6:12 p.m., her secure phone buzzed once on my desk, one line forwarded from Sarah. "They moved the final board hearing to 9 a.m. tomorrow. He's pushing for a vote." I deleted my cold coffee, rewrote the search query, and stopped blinking. I sent a rapid, encrypted message to Sarah, using Lucia's line. "Pull the departmental vendor invoices for the last 48 hours. Look for expedited PR retainers." 20 minutes later, Sarah forwarded me a raw vendor invoice PDF directly from TechNet's contributor portal. It was a blind payment of $5,000, routed to the specific freelance journalist who authored the hit piece. The paying entity was listed as a Delaware LLC, the exact same LLC that owned the proxy server IP address. I checked the precise timestamp. The payment was officially cleared exactly 22 minutes before the TechNet article went live on the server. I downloaded the raw, unassailable data packets onto a small, heavy-duty encrypted USB drive. I walked out of the office and back to the balcony. The city was completely dark. Lucia was still sitting out there, staring blankly at the skyline. I walked up to the frosted glass divider. I crouched down and slid the small, silver USB drive under the half-inch gap at the bottom of the metal frame. It skidded across the concrete and stopped near her shoe. She looked down at it, confused. "What is this?" she asked, picking it up. Sarah forwarded me the vendor invoice from TechNet's contributor portal paid by the Delaware LLC, I stated, my voice completely steady. The transaction timestamp cleared 22 minutes before the article went live. She stood up from the concrete floor, her silhouette visible through the frosted glass. "Brayden, this proves malice. The board can't ignore a direct financial transaction to the press. I have a formal, mandatory disciplinary hearing with the CEO and the full executive board tomorrow morning," she said. The hollow exhaustion was entirely gone. The sharp, highly capable director had returned. "Julian is mandated to be in the room." "Good," I said quietly, looking at her shadow through the divider. "Print the drive contents." The next morning, the air in the city was crisp. I didn't go to my office. Instead, I put on a tailored charcoal suit. At 8:30 a.m., I met Lucia in the lobby of her corporate headquarters. She wore a sharp, dark blazer, her posture rigid with absolute focus. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I built the trace architecture," I replied. She reached out, straightening the lapel of my suit jacket with a quick, precise flick of her fingers, a tiny, grounding adjustment that eased the tension in my shoulders. "If Julian attempts to debate the validity of the data packets, you will need a systems architect to translate the math for the board." We rode the glass elevator to the executive floor. When we walked into the expansive, glass-walled boardroom, Marcus, the CEO, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, flanked by two external security auditors. Julian stood near the digital projector, holding a laser pointer. Sarah sat quietly in the back row of chairs, holding a thick file folder. "Lucia," Marcus said, his tone entirely formal, "we are here to finalize the forensic review. Julian has just presented the secondary access logs." Julian offered a condescending smile. "The data is conclusive, Lucia. The transfer originated from your credentials." Lucia didn't look at Julian. She walked directly to the mahogany table and dropped 3 thick, bound folders onto the polished wood. "Those are the financial routing logs," Lucia stated, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "They mathematically prove that a shell company paid a freelance journalist exactly $5,000 22 minutes before the smear article went live on TechNet." Marcus frowned, pulling a folder toward him. The auditors immediately leaned in. Julian's confident smile faltered. "This is completely fabricated. Anyone with a basic coding background can fake a printed transaction ledger." "Actually," I said, stepping forward from the back of the room, "you cannot fake an independent payment processor timestamp." Marcus looked up. "Who are you?" "Marcus," Lucia said firmly, holding the CEO's gaze. "This is Brayden White. He's an independent systems architect, and he is the technical consultant I formally retained to audit my network traffic." It was a public, definitive claim. She wasn't hiding me. She was utilizing me as a legitimate asset in front of her entire executive board. I walked to the head of the table, unplugged Julian's presentation laptop, and connected my encrypted drive directly to the boardroom projector. "A printed ledger can be debated," I addressed the board. "Verified vendor metadata cannot." I pulled up the exported invoice metadata Sarah had retrieved from the contributor portal: receipt ID, payer entity, clearance time, everything, timestamped down to the millisecond. The payment reference ID matches the transaction block originating from the Delaware LLC, I pointed at the screen. I turned to the two external auditors. I strongly suggest you check your internal mobile device management logs for the specific authorization token that cleared this corporate expense. The lead auditor opened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys. A heavy silence fell over the room as he pulled up the MDM dashboard. The auditor looked up, his face entirely pale. He turned directly to the CEO. The auditors confirmed the authorization token originated from Julian's assigned device. The room went completely, terrifyingly quiet. The CEO stared at the auditor, then slowly turned his gaze to Julian. "Marcus, I can explain the device bounce," Julian stammered, stepping backward. "Don't," Marcus interrupted, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. He looked at the external auditors. "Call corporate security. Have Mr. Carter's hard drives seized immediately. Escort him out of the building. He is terminated." Two heavy-set security guards entered the boardroom a minute later, taking Julian by the arms and guiding him out the glass doors. Marcus stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked at Lucia, the professional arrogance replaced by uncomfortable humility. "Lucia, the suspension is lifted immediately with full back pay. We will issue a public retraction to the press within the hour." By 10 o'clock, we were walking out of the towering glass lobby. I walked beside her, the adrenaline of the boardroom fading into a quiet, grounded rhythm. "You didn't give a speech," she noted, looking over at me. "You just plugged in the drive, presented the math, and let the auditors dismantle him." "Speeches are inefficient," I said, adjusting the collar of my suit. The data was sufficient. Later that evening, the city was painted in the deep blues and purples of twilight. I was sitting on my balcony in a t-shirt, staring out at the skyline. The taillight on my car was already fixed. The yellow citation slip had been thrown away in the lobby trash can. I heard the familiar slide of the glass door next door. Lucia walked out onto her balcony. She had traded her corporate armor for a soft gray sweatshirt. She walked directly up to the frosted glass divider. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small, silver key on a plain metal ring, and set it carefully on the flat-top ledge of the divider between us. "I sent an email to the building superintendent this afternoon," she said quietly, her dark eyes locking onto mine. "I authorized them to remove the frosted glass partition tomorrow morning. But until they do, you have the key to my front door." I looked at the silver key resting on the metal ledge. It was a highly concrete action. A visible, undeniable choice to completely remove the boundaries between us. "I don't want to talk through a glass wall anymore, Brayden," she added, her voice dropping lower. "I agree," I said, picking up the key. "The current layout requires optimization." I reached over the divider, stepping forward and leaning over the cold metal railing to close the small distance between us. She stepped into my space first. She reached out, her fingers lacing quietly through mine. I rested my forehead gently against hers for a second, feeling the steady, calm rhythm of her breathing, then stepped back, letting the quiet moment stay exactly what it was. A solid, unbreakable promise. "I'll make the coffee tomorrow morning," she said, turning back toward her door. "I'll leave the door unlocked," I replied. The end. Closing thoughts. That week taught me what lasts. Steady hands, clear boundaries, and a partner who shows up when the storm hits. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.